Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 22nd of May. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather with us tonight. And as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by calling us at 1-800-472-0391. Just go ahead and type that into your cell phone right now while we're sitting here. And of course, find us on weather.gov/Alaska. That is your entryway to any of the Weather Forecast Office pages around Alaska, whether it's Fairbanks, Juneau, or South Central's Anchorage office serving your needs there. Each one of those will get you closer to where you need to be. And one more click will localize your forecast. So click once to get to your office, click twice, and now you are looking at your spot on the Alaska map for your forecast from the National Weather Service. If you can't find what you want, if you're looking for something from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center or the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, or even the Tsunami Warning Center, please let me know. I'm happy to help you find what you're looking for when you're using any of our services there, and it's my pleasure to serve you. Here's a look at the hazardous weather across the region. We are looking at a flood advisory for the Chena River there around Fairbanks. It looks like that is reaching minor flood stage. Not quite yet, but it looks like overnight it'll probably get up to maybe just above minor flood stage. So it looks like for the next 24 hours or so, a flood advisory is in effect. One other thing to point out, though, is for the eastern interior, there is an opportunity for as much as 1 to 2 inches of rain across the north slopes of the eastern Alaska Range and into the eastern interior region as we get into the holiday weekend. And it doesn't sound like over the course of 3 or 4 days that's probably a lot of rain, but since we haven't had that much rain in one spot and we are still melting out some of the higher terrain rivers, there will be some excessive water in the riverways. Now, we're not expecting any major flood problems, but you are going to notice increased debris in the rivers, and there's probably going to be some river access points that you won't be able to access. So keep that in mind if your holiday plans take you out into the eastern interior, perhaps some of the eastern Alaska Range north slope side streams and rivers there. There may be some increased flow and certainly some debris in there that you don't want to get bumped up with if you're out there on the water with your raft or your canoe. And once again, the yellow shaded area is a flood advisory for the Chena there as the levels are approaching, maybe even exceeding that minor flood stage later tonight. Here's the breakup map. We are still tracking this, but you'll notice we've kind of shifted the map northward again for tonight. The Yukon is done. We're not expecting any more issues there for breakup along the Yukon. We're still watching some of our northern rivers. The Sag is starting to see some areas of mostly open water right there in the midsections there just below the, once it gets out into the plain. The Kuparuk is starting to open up there around the headwaters. And around the Colville, we're getting some opening there around the Umiat area. Looks like this is a couple days earlier than what is average there on the record books there. So really not too far off the mark, but maybe a couple days early if you're looking at the averages there around Colville. So that's where we are on the breakup map. So far, so good as far as breakup goes. Hopefully that's been the case where you are, but we have not heard about any major issues with breakup. So we are slowly turning over to fire danger across Alaska, and as of the 22nd, just a few spots there worthy of mention today. Generally high levels of fire danger across some of the Deltana, Tanana Flats regions, and also in the Copper River Valley. But of course in southeast, generally a narrow window for fire danger there, and right now it is not active. And for many in southwest and the interior, things are still fairly quiet across the region. You can always get more information about fire danger in your community. A good first place to check with a whole lot of tools there that you can click on pretty much all day long. Fire.ak.blm for Bureau of Land Management. .gov, and many other agencies work together with the National Weather Service to keep you safe from fire danger and help predict where we should put resources there to better manage those fire weather concerns as we go throughout the season. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture, and really not a big change from yesterday. Several waves of low pressure across the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering. You can see the very large stout zone of circulation out there across Shemya and Adak. pulling an awful lot of cloud cover. This is a little bit more of a substantial and well put together front across the Bering, moving its way toward St. Paul, St. George, all the way down toward Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Out across the Gulf of Alaska is what's left over of the last one that looked like this. This is a lot more ragged, kind of torn apart, mixing in on itself, so it's really stirring up all that moisture with a lot of dry air. And some of that has kind of sloshed its way into southern parts of southeast, where we've got some pockets of rain here, and also across the northern sections of southeast. Some hit and miss areas of sunshine, some of that making its way into the capital city as we understand it today. And out across the west, in between these two systems, is a weak area of high pressure that's helped to break up some of the clouds, including for a time, at least in south central. Perhaps you saw some of that if you're in the Anchorage area, all the way up toward Nome, Bethel, down toward Dillingham. Hit and miss cloud cover. Another day, another start with fog around Bethel earlier this morning, second day in a row, I believe. And then out around Kotzebue, another weak area of low pressure. This is pushing moisture into the interior, and this is where we've seen showers and thunderstorms fire up once again today. So a little bit more toward that summery feel across the central and eastern interior this afternoon, as those storm clouds have been rumbling across the Middle Tanana Valley and points eastward. Up north, plenty of clouds across the North Slope. Really not going to see a whole lot of change there. In fact, might get a little thicker as we get into the next couple days with IFR conditions coming up. We'll take a look at that in your aviation weather here in just a few minutes. As you can see this afternoon, showers and thunderstorms are widely scattered across the interior, with low pressure down to about 999 millibars. Out west, a 982 millibar low. The upper level features there wrapping in that cold air behind it, the front being pushed out in front of it, north and to the east, and with clouds building in around the eastern chain, some areas of light rain falling there. You can see the very ragged appearance of low pressure across the Gulf, and there's some of the leftover showers from that last wave that pushed in across the north and eastern Gulf. As we head into tonight, won't see a huge change in that. Low pressure still hovering out here across the Gulf, with some spotty areas of showers and maybe a thunderstorm or two still holding on across the upper Yukon and the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. Watch for areas of rain and snow showers to mix across the Brooks Range out toward the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Places like AKwx may still see some of that. By and large, though, it's all rain showers for the west coast, across the southern Bering Sea. The low kind of disconnecting a little bit more from the frontal boundary there. It's dropping to about 986 millibars. And because this isn't really a very tightly wound system, the threat for very strong winds or high seas with it is greatly diminished. Not absent, but greatly diminished there as we get into tonight and tomorrow. Here's a look at Wednesday, and once again, that front is really just falling apart. So now we're using the black dash line. That is a trough of low pressure, meaning it's lost its temperature change characteristics. A front needs to have kind of a wind shift, a temperature change, a humidity shift, and a pressure drop to be called a front. And in this case, we are just talking about a pressure drop, no discernible changes otherwise. And because of that, we usually don't have as much forcing to get the rain or the wind going around those pressure patterns there. So this helps us know what kind of system we're dealing with. And in this case, it is a weakening system as we get into Wednesday. So pockets of rain and some wind across the central and eastern chain, some rainfall moving across the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island. Of course, the Gulf Coast is back in showers there, no surprise. And parts of southeast also looking at some showers, mainly along the higher train into southern parts of southeast. And once again, there could be some breaks as we get into Wednesday. From the Lynn Canal all the way down toward Stevens Passage and perhaps southern parts of the outer coast, if you're lucky there. Widely scattered showers and thunderstorms are possible again for the central and eastern interior, so watch for that as you're getting your aviation briefings tomorrow there from the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit. As we get into Thursday, not a big change for the interior. We still have our trough of low pressure that is forming because of heat being kind of deposited and collected here in the central and eastern interior, helping to bubble up those clouds in the afternoon, and that could stretch into the upper Kuskokwim. Low pressure still hovering across the southern Bering, just shy of 1,000 millibars, and we've got our area of low pressure working its way northward, bringing rainfall back into the Kenai Peninsula and parts of Prince William Sound and northern sections of southeast, southern southeast. Might see a little more of the sun as we go into Thursday. Here's a quick check of your temperatures for Wednesday morning. 40s for southeast, little 40s for south central, mid 40s perhaps for southwest. Once you get into Norton Sound and northward, you're back into the 30s. For Kotzebue Sound, Kivalina is looking at 33, 19 in Barrow, 23 around Kaktovik with a high of 30 on Wednesday. Back in the 60s for the interior. South central looks like mid to upper 50s, about the same for southeast. 40s you're looking at for the Alaska Peninsula, 43 in St. Paul, 44 in Nunivak Island. Overnight lows in the 30s and 40s for many in the interior, still very mild around Fairbanks. South central closer to 40, southeast mid 40s. The North Slope back in the lower 20s and below freezing, 30s and 40s for the southwest. And high temperatures on Thursday, once again, pretty warm for the interior. Fairbanks looking at about 53. And now, aviation weather around Alaska. Moving on to flying weather now, IFR conditions are expected across the west coast all the way out toward Shemya and just about Kiska or so up toward St. Matthew Island. A large area of MVFR will hover across the southern Bering Sea, St. Paul, St. George, and the central chain, and across the north and eastern Gulf. You'll notice a little bit of VFR for really most of the panhandle as we get going through Wednesday morning, but Chilkoot and White Pass may have some lowered ceilings and visibilities to start. Rain will be expected across the northern Gulf with IFR just making its way past Hitchinbrook entrance. And the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula is also expected to start at MVFR. The north slope will linger under IFR conditions all the way from Barrow down to Atkasuk, AKwx, and Adigan Pass and eastward toward Kaktovik, and then spread out a little bit more westward toward Wainwright as we head into Wednesday afternoon. Most of the interior looks to be A-OK. VFR conditions expected all the way from Norton Sound to Kotzebue Sound and across the Seward Peninsula and into the Kuskokwim and southwest Delta regions there. The southwestern Capes, though, will just be on that fringe of MVFR conditions through most of the afternoon. IFR is lingering out in the west and the Bering Sea, and you'll notice a patch of IFR stretching up from about Chignik all the way down toward Akiak. Most of Kodiak Island at this point is looking to be MVFR through most of your Wednesday afternoon. And that patch of VFR conditions we saw to start the day in southeast, that's going to fill in. Expect marginal conditions through most of your day. As we get into Thursday morning, not a whole lot of change in southeast or really most of the Gulf. The Prince William Sound region is expected to hold under MVFR conditions. IFR takes over a larger part of Kodiak Island and stretches across the Alaska Peninsula toward the Pribilofs and the southern Bering Sea. And very little change for the Beaufort Sea coast. The Chukchi coast from Wainwright toward Barrow is also expected to see IFR, and that increases as we head into Thursday afternoon. A little bit of that push coming southward will move lowered ceilings and visibility into Kotzebue Sound, so places like Shishmaref, Kivalina, Kotzebue, and a large portion of the Brooks Range will be looking at IFR conditions. Some patchy MVFR across the middle Tanana Valley and into the upper Kuskokwim. Southeast gets a little bit of relief. IFR, though, spreads into northern and western sections of the Gulf and all the way down the Pacific coast, as well as a larger part of the Bering Sea. Let's take a look at some of your favorite passes now as we get into your Wednesday afternoon. Some improvements expected around AKwx Pass and Adigan Pass as we get into your Wednesday there. VFR expected there for the afternoon in Adigan. As we look at Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, things should be pretty good through most of the day. Remember, you will see some more changes, though, as we get into Thursday. Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, all the way around to Isabel Pass, expected to be visual flight rule all day long Wednesday. Mentasta Pass looks pretty good at this point, and Tanita Pass, as we saw earlier, looks to be A-OK. As we get into Portage Pass, marginal conditions will mainly be found on the eastern side. The west side, again, up and down Cook Inlet, should be VFR. And Chilkoot and White Pass are expected to see some improvements. But remember, Wednesday is probably the pick of the day if you compare that to what's coming our way on Thursday. For freezing levels, cooler air aloft is sitting across some of the northern Gulf there. This is all surrounded in an area of low pressure sitting in place right now, and it's kind of gathering energy from what we see out here in the Bering. So we've got a lot of warm air shoved up across western Canada, and underneath that we've seen some convection in the last few days. So if you've seen some more of those towering cumulus here across the middle Tanana Valley and points westward even, we'll be watching for more convection as the day goes on. Here's your icing potential. Moisture is still present, but those levels are climbing there as we're getting into some of the warmer parts of the year. So we're looking at least some isolated moderate potential there across the northern Gulf, across the Copper River Basin, the Tanana Valley, and the upper Yukon, all the way up toward the North Slope, anywhere from about 7,000 to 8,000 feet. Across the west, pretty patchy stuff. Most of southwestern Alaska is kind of out of that threat, except for some of the extreme outlying areas on the southwest coast and the Alaska Peninsula. To get into that, you'll have to get above about 6,000 feet at this point. For the jet stream, our main corridor of fast-moving winds is trying to expand its control a little bit from the heart of the Bering, where it's been for a long time, and a little bit more into the Gulf. This negatively tilted trough will start to take shape a little bit as we get into Thursday and Friday. The main corridor of fast winds, though, is really pointed at southeast, coming in from the south, about 90 to over 100 knots, and then our coldest air is still being held off to the west at this point. So we're in a pretty active pattern as southerlies continue to slosh up clouds and occasional showers across Prince William Sound and south central, with the core of the wettest weather, though, from Prince William Sound into southeast, and mild weather across the interior, and occasional bursts of winds across south and western Alaska in the chain. You'll see similar conditions there at 3,000 feet. The fastest winds across the central and western chain, and offshore flow for south and western Alaska, and light winds across the interior, with southerlies continuing for southeast. What about turbulence? Well, there's still an opportunity for considerable moderate across the Panhandle into the northern Gulf and across the central and western chain, most of that below 4,000 feet. Back with your Marines in just a few minutes. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is Eric Stevens, our good friend from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at UAF. And thanks for joining us, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to be here, Dave.
We love to hear about all the fascinating developments, new and old, and how we're using the tools here, especially around Alaska. And I've got to think that, satellite meteorology right now is a fascinating time to be involved in. If we go back to the first satellite, Tyros, back in 1960, I think is when we got some of those first pictures. Weather and meteorology probably changed that day for a whole lot of people, and it's still changing today, right?
Oh, you know it. Satellite imagery is so important, and it's getting better all the time. Yeah. Of course, never perfect, but especially for us in Alaska, where there are other data sets like radars and weather balloons are so thinly spread. Right. The satellite is the great equalizer because the satellite sees everything.
Right.
Yeah. Right. We've got one particular issue in volcanic ash detection.
That's a big deal here. Yeah.
You know it. If you fly an airplane into volcanic ash, your jet engine might just fail. And an airplane without engines is in a world of hurt. Sure. So if there's a volcano that goes off, satellite imagery is the way to track that plume of ash and to tell pilots this is where you need to not be to avoid this ash plume. And there's a phrase out there, what's the difference? What's the difference?
Okay.
Well, it turns out, what we're going to discuss today, that the difference is everything. There's a technique called channel differencing. Okay. That if you take one piece of the spectrum of what the satellite detects and a slightly different wavelength of that spectrum, even though those two images might look similar, magical things happen when you subtract one from the other. And they reveal information that was already there, but it was hard to find until you did that subtraction.
That sounds like Nicolas Cage in National Treasure when he's got those fancy glasses and he's flipping one up and back and forth. I mean, is this what we're talking about?
Well, let's go more highbrow and talk Michelangelo. Oh, so apparently Michelangelo made some amazing sculpture, and someone said, Michael, that's amazing. How did you do it? And Michelangelo's reply allegedly was, well, in that rock, the statue was already in there. Right. I just scraped away the unnecessary bits. In satellite meteorology, sometimes there are meteorological features that are in the data, but you can't see it until you combine or difference some of the channels. Okay. And we've got a case, good old Pavlov volcano goes off now and then. Sure. And you can observe directly a picture of the volcano. Just take it with your iPhone. You can see a volcano going off. Yep. Right. But if you want to get the broad view, we need satellite to do that. Now, there are a couple of wavelengths that we can look at. So what's a wavelength? That's the amount of space between a peak and a valley and another peak in a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're going to look at 12 micron wavelength and 10.8 micron wavelength.
What is a micron?
So what's a micron? Yeah, we're getting into the geek department now. A micron is a unit of length, and it is quite tiny. We're looking at what's called long wave wavelengths, but it takes 25,000 of these microns to make an inch. A human blood cell is about 5 microns across. So when we're talking about 12 micron imagery as allegedly long wave, well, that's relative.
Pretty short for light.
Yeah, it's other part of the, it's just an expression for the spectrum there. Okay. So we can look at a 12 micron image, say a satellite image. At 12 microns, we're seeing a heat signature here, really, and the way this color enhancement works is the yellow and the red stuff is high cold clouds down here over the Gulf of Alaska into South Central. And if you were asked, where do you find the volcanic ash plume in this image?
Hey, where do you find the volcanic plume in this image?
It's hard to do. I'm not sure I could find it. If you were to look at this image and just say, show me what jumps out at you here, I'd say, well, nothing really. Well, let's look. So 12 micron doesn't help us. Let's look at 10.8 microns.
All right.
All right, look at that. It's practically the same image. So where's this volcanic ash? Can't find it at 12 microns, can't really see it at 10.8, but when we subtract one channel from the other, magically, the plume appears. The color enhancement here highlights the ash in blue.
Wow.
The information was already there, but we couldn't find it until we subtracted one channel from another.
Very interesting.
It's almost magical. Similarly, let's say you're looking for fog up on the north slope. It's kind of a foggy neighborhood.
Sure.
In 11 micron and 3.9 micron, we've got a 3.9 micron image here. It's a big fuzzy blur over Barrow. We can't see where the fog is. But the information is lurking in there waiting for us to reveal it. All we have to do is find that difference between the 11 micron and the 3.9, and then this image becomes this image, and the fog bank jumps right out, and you can see it up there at Barrow. Now, you got to choose the right tool for the job.
Sure.
Like they say, you open your toolbox, all kinds of stuff in there. What do we need for this particular task? If you want to find volcanic ash, we look at 12 and 10.8 micron, find that difference. If you want to find fog, we'll look at 11 and 3.9 micron, find that difference. It's great, different tools for different jobs. Of course, there's always caveats and gotchas, but this fog procedure, it only works at night, because when the sun comes up, it gets in the way. So every product has its strengths and limitations, and in meteorology, the challenge is using the right tool for the right job, and these are some of those tools.
And discovery is still happening, even with meteorology. The weather's been around for a long time, but the tools that are being developed to understand the meteorology is fascinating and still very new science.
It's such a young science. We've come so far. I'm getting old enough now that I can literally say that, when I was a boy, we didn't have this kind of thing. And there's new things happening all the time. New satellites will be launched in coming years that will have better instruments than ever before. It's an exciting time, and this is so helpful for Alaska because satellites help fill in the gaps between other ways of observing the weather. Satellites, the great equalizer for Alaska.
Yeah, and help so many people stay safe in so many ways every day up here in the last frontier.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, protecting lives and property.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. We love to hear about this fascinating information, and boy, it just makes me want to go watch satellite pictures all day. So hopefully we're inspiring more people to do the same thing and just be curious. It's a wonderful thing. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you next time. And now, marine weather around Alaska. Time for a quick check of your sea ice edge, and the main ice pack up north is still in place, but one thing has changed a little bit with that, and with the north and easterly flow, we've moved in some multi-year ice, some thicker ice, some older ice up here across the Beaufort Sea, so some of this may be a little slower to erode and melt over time. Now, that's not true for what we see over here across the Chukchi. We still have a lot of kind of marginal ice here, and certainly some open water now north of the Bering Strait and into Kotzebue Sound. There's still some ice closer to the coast around Kotzebue, Shishmaref, and just south of Wales. And then a lot of what you see across the Chukchi will still be changing, but some of this is also being pushed off the shore with that continued east and northeasterly flow. Anytime you want to check out the sea ice edge, make sure you do that at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for the latest outlook and sea ice conditions there. In southeast, light winds will be featured across the outer coast, only 10 knots or so. Still looking at seas holding around 7 to 8 feet on the inside. 10 to 15 knot winds there, a southerly flow in the Lynn Canal with 3-foot seas, and small seas for the Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait region. As we get into Thursday, not a big change across most areas. The winds will come up just a little bit more, about 5 knots or so across the outer coast. Looking at south and southeasterlies up to 15 to 20 knots. And 6 to 7 foot seas across the outer coast with about 2 to 4 foot seas across the inside passage. The Lynn Canal looking at 20 knots from the south with a 4-foot sea on Thursday. Across south central, look for a northeasterly flow. Inside of Prince William Sound, a 2-foot sea there, about the same across Cook Inlet. Easterlies blowing across the western Barren Islands and also into the eastern Barrens, 20 knots with a 7-foot sea, about the same outside of Resurrection Bay. And very little change as we get into Thursday. Winds come up a little bit more inside of Prince William Sound. 3-foot seas expected there on a 15-knot wind. Otherwise, north and easterlies coming down Cook Inlet about 10 knots with 3-foot seas. And easterlies blowing over the Barren Islands 20 to 25 with a 4 to 6-foot sea on Thursday. For Bristol Bay, expected 25-knot wind, a little stronger there. Southeasterlies bringing in 5-foot seas, 4-foot seas down the coast. South and easterly flow coming into Kodiak Island, and Most of the Alaska Peninsula there, about 10 to 20 knots. Northeasterlies inside of Shelikof Strait, up to 6-foot seas expected there. Winds come up a little bit more inside of the strait as we head into Thursday. Easterlies blowing into Kodiak Island, expected to reach 15 knots with a 5-foot sea. Southwesterlies coming into the Alaska Peninsula, about 6 to 9-foot seas there on that 15-knot wind, and an easterly flow across the Alaska Peninsula, holding around 10 to 15 knots on Thursday. Southwesterlies are a little stronger here. This is all behind that front we've been watching. The front will be dying off, but it's still pulling in a little bit of that breeze. So you're talking about 20 to 35 knot winds. Seas holding across the Pacific coast anywhere from 10 to 20 feet. And you're looking at the Aleutians and the Bering Sea coast holding around 7 to 21 feet as you move out to the west. The wind's a little bit stronger and seas certainly higher as you get into that stronger northwesterly flow. For Thursday, everything settles down a little bit. You can still see that wraparound pattern, though, following the low pressure system. South and westerly winds across the central and eastern chain. West and northwesterly winds are going to be a little stronger, certainly colder, and 7 to 13-foot seas across the central chain there. A little bit smaller seas as you head out toward Kiska and Attu, about 8 to 10 feet, with winds holding around 20 to 25 for that region. For Wednesday along the west coast, we're dealing with mainly an offshore flow. Remember, low pressure's out here across the west, so that's pulling in air off the continent. It's going to be a little warmer there too. 10 to 25 knot winds expected with the east and southeasterly flow. Southerlies for the Pribilofs, 15 knots and a 6-foot sea. 10 knot winds across north and south. Look for northerlies to develop there on Thursday. North and easterly winds from St. Lawrence Island down toward the Pribilofs. And easterlies for St. Paul and St. George, 15 knots and 8-foot seas expected there for your Thursday. For the North Slope, look for easterlies blowing across some of that thicker ice once again. Look for ice all the way out toward Barrow at 20 to 25 knot wind expected there. And looking for easterlies off the Chukchi coast, a light west wind blowing into Kotzebue Sound though with a 3-foot sea expected on Wednesday. That becomes a little more northwesterly with time on Thursday. Easterlies blowing across the Beaufort around 20 knots with 10 to 15 knots coming in across Kotzebue Sound and the Chukchi coast for your Thursday afternoon. Let's recap our weather across Alaska. Remember, here's our front across the west that's driving in those west and northwesterly winds for the chain. Showers will continue across the interior, and don't be surprised to hear a little bit of thunder and see a little bit of lightning now across the central and eastern interior and maybe into the upper Kuskokwim as warm enough air there is bubbling up those clouds that we would associate with summertime weather. So be careful out there. And the first sound of thunder and lightning, seek shelter inside. Wait about 30 minutes for that last sound and sighting of lightning to go away before it's safe to go back out. Showers across the northern and eastern Gulf Coast. We'll see that continue as we head into your holiday weekend. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.